Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens. This is Jake along with Scott, and people might by now be calling us the American Single Malt Lens for the amount of American single malts that we talk about here on the Bourbon Lens. But rest assured, it's still bourbon because that's where we're from, the Kentucky State. But we're heading out to New Mexico, and we're going to hang out with our buddy Colin from Santa Fe Spirits in the Colkegan. So Colin, thank you for joining the Bourbon Lens tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. Yeah. Matt at Big Thirst, got us all connected for a media event back in the day, and we got really excited, and things ebb and flow. Life happens. And then we reconnect at Whiskey Live, and, I was like, I got his card. Let's make this happen. So here we are. So it's finally the day's arrived. I'm
glad to be here, and I'm glad we managed to make it happen.
Yeah. And it's the busiest time of the year for the whiskey community, right? So
it really is.
Unlike anyone else, right? You have released a new product. We're going to talk about that here later in the episode. But first, I think it's important just, what's it like for New Mexico? I feel like that's a state that a lot of people don't venture to. So what's it like in New Mexico in the fall as you get ready for the holiday season there in the southwestern part of the United States?
It's, for me, I love it. I came, as you can tell by my odd accent, for those who don't know us, Northern England. So we definitely had seasons there. I like New Mexico for its definite seasonal shifts that we have, but none of them really are too extreme. So our summers are hot. We get up in the high 90s, but we don't have humidity. You don't feel it. And our winters, we have snow. We've got a ski basin just up the hill from Santa Fe. Those of you who know Santa Fe. But it's light snow. I was just saying a while ago that we get snow in the fall too. We had 3 inches of snow on Thursday. It stopped about 9 o'clock in the morning. It was gone by 1 o'clock. It's so dry here down in the town that it evaporates. But it does mean, you can dig out your sweaters and, have a good old time. Jeans, tennies, and a sweater. You're in good shape. I like it that way. And it's my favorite season here.
Is New Mexico like this? So we can get like 3 seasons in a day, especially like coming into winter or coming out of winter, like into spring. We'll get, rainy in the morning, 70-degree heat, and then it'll be frost at the evening. Does that happen out where you all are too?
Definitely. Our fall and our spring are like that. So you can, as I said, snow. By the time it's evaporated, obviously it evaporates as well as melts here. So we can have, wake up to a snowstorm thinking, oh my God, we're sucked in for the day. And then it'll clear out and you could put your shorts on for the afternoon. So it's the spring and the fall are just like that. The winter is a bit more steady and the summer's a bit more steady. But yeah, 3 seasons in a day.
And so that's interesting, right? So, and the reason I asked the question, because I got to have good segues, right? If you're a host, you got to segue things, right? So as things change, right, and there's oddball entities that happen, how does a Northern Englishman get into American single malt whiskey, right? That seems like an oxymoron if I've ever heard one.
I was talking to another friend. I don't know if you know Spirit Works. They do actually a good bourbon and a rye. The guy's from California. He's an English fella too. And we said, well,
Slow Gin Frizz Finished Rye Whiskey by Spirit Works.
Yes.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, Timo, Ashby's the distiller. She should get the credit, and Timo would actually say the same thing. Timo and I agreed. We came over here to steal your women and make better whiskey. And that's our little joke, because he's married an American and so have I. They got much straighter teeth than the English, that's for sure. So we like marrying Americans. But anyway, no, how did I end up here? My wife's parents grew up in New Mexico. They're not really from here, but they were planted here as kids. And they always had a love of, New Mexico. And to be honest, when I used to live in the Caribbean, which is where I met my wife. It was a cheap place to stay. And we were looking around at where we're going to be. Architecture was my profession at that time. And she was a plein air, landscape artist. And New Mexico really works well for both of those. So we kept coming back. And ended up, for me, 18 years in architecture, for her, a nice art career. And it's not a retirement. I'm not that old, but in your mid 40s, when the economy tanks, when nobody needs an architect, you look for something different. And I'd grown to love whiskeys. And everybody said, "Oh, you're in America, you're going to do a bourbon." I'm a bit of an ornery old cuss, as you might be able to tell. So I decided, no, I'm going to do something different. So I latched onto single malts, and not really from my history in England. I couldn't afford a good single malt when I lived in England. I was a student. But a couple of people gave me a bottle as a thank you for a nice house I designed for them. And then another bottle from somebody else. And I started collecting them, and hence the making single malts in New Mexico. We'll talk a bit more about it later, but it's a great place because of our evaporation and lack of humidity to be making whiskey. But we can talk about that in more detail later.
One of the things, I'm interested, what part of the Caribbean were you living in?
I was actually in the British Virgin Islands. It was an easy, extrapolation from being in England. I actually moved there because the middle brother had started a windsurf school, which is a dumb thing to do in your 20s. It's not just about windsurfing. We wanted to windsurf, and he realized, it's a bit about business too. But he was out there. I was actually being the classic line was interior designer, but long history there in London doing some hotel projects. And one day they came in and said, "Hey, the company just went bankrupt." Oh dear. So we're all out of a job. So I went to hang with my brother, ended up in the Virgin Islands. My goal for going there, because I was going to be a yuppie in London, and after 3 or 4 years decided it's not for me. I was going to go and be a beach bum. And it's the one profession I really failed miserably at, believe it or not. Within a year, I was married with a 1-year-old. I adopted my wife had a very young daughter at the time called Phoebe, who's now my daughter of 32, believe it or not. And I had a job with New York clients who wanted to build a house every 8 months, and a Caribbean work crew who would, in between doobies say, "It takes 3 years to build a house, man. You got to slow down." And it was a stressful time. So I failed at being a beach bum.
That's impressive.
It is. Oh man, that's hilarious. Like as you make this transition, right? Because architecture is right. People give you a problem, and you're going to design a solution for them, right? So you think about this economic downturn. You're not doing architecture. You're getting in. You like say, "Hey, I want to get into whiskey, but I want to." The solution is, or the problem is, there's a lot of bourbon. There's a lot of rye whiskey.
Yeah.
Let's do American single malt. So like, how do you go from, just kind of solutionizing the problem in front of you to get in or enter into this whiskey universe?
Well, it's a really good question. I wouldn't advise it for other people because we've really learned in many, many different ways. But I tackled it as a problem-solving task. We need to build out a facility. It's similar to architecture. It's tanks, and then we need an engineer. Instead of an engineer for, a heating system for a house, we got one for a plumbing system for stills. And okay, we need a product. Well, let's treat it like a project. That's, look at the mash bill, look at this, look at that, look at the other. And being as linear as that, you get really deep into it, and you build the facility, you come out with a product. We've done 4 expansions since we started. And after a few years, you say, okay, well, everybody starts looking at you. You say, well, yeah, you're selling a little bit. Now you've got to sell a lot. That's the whole goal of small businesses, to make it bigger and go further. And that's when we realized selling whiskey is really difficult. Or selling spirits, not a good quality whiskey. Everybody likes it, but to get access to the market is difficult. So really, the sales and marketing folks are going to do a lot better starting a distillery than the idealist architects or engineers. Because you sort of go, "Hey, we got a great product. We think you should buy it." And bars and restaurants say, "Well, how much is it? What's the price point?" And you're like, "What? Price point?" So it's a challenge. But that's really how I dove into it, which is, as you said, and you obviously know architecture, to be able to comment on it like that, it's problem solving for people.
Yeah. My father-in-law is a builder, and,
Okay.
you know,
really get it then.
yeah, I got it. When I was trying to finish my basement, and, he built the house that I'm in, and I'm like, this is what I want to do. And he's like, can't do that. And I'm like, why? He's like, it's a big empty square. He's like, can't do it. Load bearing wall, not going to happen. And I was like, yes. So I get that. I understand those idioms. But it's really interesting when people that are non-whiskey traditionalist or non-craft adjacent, right, jobs, getting into this super creative process. And so, like, I find it really interesting to see like how people create those stories and how they create the brand behind that. And so when you land on this single malt and you start to, you know, solve that problem, like what was that next step to kind of say, hey, we need to bring something to market and like create a brand and a product and services? Like that was the next problem to solve right after you have everything up. Like what was the process of building that part out?
There was a lot of trial and error, and a lot of give it a go and work really hard, and then realize it's not so much about hard work. It's about very specific targeted connections. And to be honest, a lot more marketing than worrying about quality of product. And I don't say that lightly. And it's not to say that everybody who's been successful doesn't care about their product. That's not the case. We were making the best whiskey we could. And then when we had spare time, we'd go and see if we could sell it. My distiller and myself. And then my distiller, my office manager and myself. And then, you know, our tasting room manager. You know, when you're not working the bar, can you go out in the daytime and sell? And that wasn't the way to do it. So we hired a full-time salesperson in New Mexico and a full-time salesperson in Colorado. And that's when I learned you sort of got to be willing to spend a lot of money to what I call front load, you know, pay for people to go into accounts day in, day out and get turned down. It's a bit like baseball. If you can hit a 0.3 average, I'm not a baseball person. I'm probably using the wrong vernacular here. But if you can hit a 0.3 average, you're like, hit 3 times out of 10, you're really good. You know, It's the same with whiskey sales. If 3 accounts say, okay, you know, I'll come back, and it's not that they don't want or care or anything, but they've got day jobs. I mean, they're trying to keep the store stocked with their Jack Daniels or their Smirnoff, because that's what pays the bills. And you're coming in with like, this is really good. Would you spend some of your money on something you haven't tried before? So it's tastings and it's things like this, talking about it. And it's, which is a lot longer road to success. And a lot of us entrepreneurs are pretty impatient. You know, I sort of categorize myself as an entrepreneur. I had an architecture business. In between that and whiskey, I started a landscape architecture business and tree cutting business, you know, so serial entrepreneur, which is not a good thing. But it turned one thing into another. But the getting to market was actually the biggest challenge for a small business. And I think market access in the liquor industry, there's a reason why we're always talking about changes. Can we get tax deductions? Can we work on direct-to-consumer shipping? You know, we do online sales, which would be technically direct-to-consumer, but it goes through 3 other people who all make a bigger margin than we do. So our margins aren't there until we can do it directly, because we're trying to change the landscape of liquor sales to fit small business. And it's a lot more geared towards Diageo, Pernod Ricard, Campari, who they've earned their chops. It's not that they're unfair. They've gone through what we've gone through. They just happen to all be, you know, a couple of 100 years old or haven't done it for a long time, you know.
All right. So I guess speaking about age, you started this in 2010, right?
Yeah.
So at what point did you first, step foot into the liquor stores and say, okay, we've got this product and it's ready to go and we want you to buy it?
Well, it was actually 2011. And I keep saying this, but I do mean this sincerely. I wouldn't advise going about it the way I did. There's a lot of, I've got white hair. This was gray last week. It's gone white now. It was nice and brown when I started. It causes a lot of gray hair. It was actually in 2011. And what we decided to do was, as we call it, test the market and try and make some cash flow with an unaged whiskey. So you might not have come across our unaged whiskey, which is a white dog. And we were being really smart because it's a white dog and we're in New Mexico. We called it Silver Coyote. So we thought that would, raise an eyebrow too. And it did, because everybody said, this can't be a whiskey. It's not brown. And we realized that we were trying to educate every account we went into on what a white whiskey was first.
Yeah.
So again, we learned. And that was our inroad into the market. The apple brandy that we make, which is where this whole thing started, in my apple orchard that I'm actually sitting in right now, or in the house in the apple orchard right now. We sold that after about a year because we only age it for a year in New Oak. And then we added a gin and a vodka, basically because our distributor, which was Republic National at the time, advised us, you've got to have a vodka. That's a good lead into accounts. And then you can talk about your other products later. For us, we didn't think we had a whiskey that we really wanted to hang our hat on until we were 5 years old, which is the Colkegan, the classic orange label, as it's known.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think that's the other thing that, is really interesting. So you start at the precipice of the bourbon boom, right?
Yeah.
Because bourbon 2008 and climbing, like that's kind of when it all like starts to really gain steam. And you can no longer find Van Winkle's sitting on the Rite Aid shelf like you used to be able to. And we missed those days.
Yeah.
I remember it like yesterday.
Yeah, I do. I remember the first bottle of whiskey I ever bought was Weller 12 for $24. But
wow.
Yeah. When?
Should have kept.
Should have, but I drank it in like 2 nights.
Yeah, I hope you did. It's good.
But what was it like trying to educate them on this new thing called American Single Malt that really hasn't taken off? And we're sitting here in 2022 with a lot of big legislation about to happen with the TTB, right? Like, so what's it like to start on the beginning of this train and see it, as it really kind of crosses the finish line here in the next couple of months, hopefully?
That's definitely the more fun side of what we've been doing at Santa Fe Spirits, or what I've been doing. A lot of people have come and gone, as they do. Distillers are like gypsies. They always want to go somewhere else, which is fine. And you educate them and teach them, and then they move. But so that's why I say me. It's not all about me. Everybody who's had their hands on this has had a contributing factor. But for me, I'm very much a people person. You can probably tell by how much I talk. But I'm a people person, so I've enjoyed the journey because of the craft spirits industry. So we used to go to ADI conferences, which was really a lot more for American Distilling Institute. People wanting to start a distillery, and Bill Owens did a great job of that. As that progressed, we ended up starting the American Craft Spirits Association, and we were one of the founding members. That really, just talking to other distillers about what are you doing? Well, we're doing a single malt. Oh, so are we. And we realized, there's a few of us around. And in 2015, actually it was 8 distilleries or people from distilleries gathered at a conference, it was an ADI conference. And we all went and hid in the, and I'm sure everybody knows this store, Binny's. And Brett Pontoni, which everybody knows if they ever sell spirits to Binny's, he's a great guy, said, you can have our conference room, sit in there. What are you guys talking about? He said, well, you can sit in if you like. So we did in the background. And we sat around and thought, nobody knows what we're talking about. We've got to get a category. And you walk down the liquor aisles, you see rye, you see bourbon, you see gin, you see vodka, you see American whiskey. It's come on since. You can even see Japanese whiskey sections. We need an American single malt whiskey section. And we actually came, well, if we're going to do that, we've got to approach the TTB. And we've also got to decide on some guidelines. And we call them sort of guide rails more than anything. And that was really the most formative thing for American Single Malt. Funnily enough, was that one meeting where we thought we'd be here arguing for 2 or 3 hours because we're a bunch of, idealists doing our own thing. It took about half an hour. Yes, that's what we should do. This is how we should formulate it. We don't really know the details. Let's go and have a drink. So we went to the bar and had a drink. And that was the start of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission. So that was a big factor in single malts. I think the fact that ACSA and ADI have recognized sort of the entrepreneurial spirit of everything, that they've given license to be able to talk about American single malts. And they invite now the commission to conferences. We were a founding member of the commission, but really, I've got to give kudos to Steve Hawley, who was one of the founders of Westland, a wonderful whiskey, as I'm sure you guys have tasted before. He's really guided us through the whole process. And I say guided, he's the one who schleps up to DC to do all the work.
That's the tough work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shaking hands and kissing babies.
Shaking babies and kissing hands. Shaking, yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah. So, yeah, there's been a lot of people who've helped each other, and we really call ourselves an inclusive group. I get quoted a lot of saying that the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission is an inclusive society. You'll hear the association talk about an exclusive society, which for them means high quality. And it's true. They've done a great job. And they really are somebody we give the respect they deserve. They've done a lot for the Scottish industry, which is why everybody talks about Scotch. Irish whiskey's been around longer and is harder to make, etc., etc. And whiskey didn't even really start in Scotland, but we won't get into that. That's another whole podcast.
Oh boy, yeah! Shots fired on the podcast.
Shots fired. Yeah.
So speaking of, which is really interesting, talking about inclusivity, right? Just look at what was done with Lost Lantern, the American vatted single malt that they did, right? Like they partnered with a lot of those single malt commission team to build that, and you all are an element in that whiskey, right? So I think that's just a cool, part from a inclusivity perspective. And so like now that you all are you got your footing, right? You have your brand, you know what's going, what's happening with the TTB, what's it like establishing, I think a unique bottle for those people who don't see this. We'll take pictures. It'll be on the, website, and if that ever comes back up, and social medias and all those things. You have a really nice black bottle. The colors are easy and distinct to pop out. What's it like to put that whiskey in a bottle and find your shelf space so that the consumer at $52.99, if you're doing 5-year-old roughly whiskey in your product, that's about $10 a year. That fits right in line with how I buy my whiskey, just in general. That's my rule of thumb. So like, how do you educate the consumer to say, hey, Colkegan, whether, smoked, and we'll talk about like that or the unsmoked that's just released. How do you educate the consumer on that?
It really depends on the consumer that you're actually talking to. So, and I still do this. If I'm doing a tasting in a grocery store, I will be approached, because you're pouring out samples of whiskey. You can do that in New Mexico, and then you can't do it everywhere. You're pouring out samples of whiskey, and they say, "Well, what is this?" And it's like, "Well, do you know much about whiskey?" Well, yeah, it's all made in Kentucky. Okay, so now I know who I'm talking to. this is an American single malt. And you start explaining the category. If they start to go glassy-eyed, okay, I'm going to lose this one. I better shut up and move on. But it depends on who you're talking to. So a lot of the story to Scotch drinkers is, for our mesquite smoked single malt, is it noses like an Islay whiskey, but it drinks like a Highland. It doesn't quite have the punch that the Islay, that I actually love. It doesn't quite have the punch that they do. If you're talking to a bourbon drinker, you actually start, for me, they get the bourbons, 51% corn or minimum 51% corn, et cetera, et cetera. We explain this as an exciting new category that's made all over the US, that's an American single malt, and it's 100% malted barley in our case. And we I'm losing my tongue here, mesquite smoke a third of the grain. And we age in new and used oak, because that's what you can do with American single malts. So it's less restrictive. So you're going to find a wider category. So you can hear the story being different. And a lot of times we are very careful about saying smoked whiskey, because people go straight to Lagavulin or Lafroig, which great whiskeys, but not for an introduction to whiskeys. A lot of people will just get scared off. So we don't talk about those so much.
So how do you classify like what you all are doing with the mesquite smoke that you all have? How do you classify that to educate the consumer? Because it's a lot different than a variety of other ones that may be using some peat. We talked about, Westland, they have some peat in their blend.
Yeah.
Like, how do you educate about just that aspect of it?
It again is back to the forum we're in. If we're doing a whiskey class, we really do get into, whiskey's the category. There's bourbon, rye, American whiskeys, and single malts under that. But we will actually explain why it's an approachable whiskey. In our case, it is smoked, but it's a light smoke, and the new oak helps tone it down. So we describe a lot more of the process of how we get to there, and then we let them taste it. And by then, of course, they're sitting with a glass of whiskey in their hand, and we're saying, don't drink it yet. By then, they're ready for whatever it is that's interesting we've talked about. I always enjoy talking about, Westland that does they have peat because it's damp up there in the Northwest. Mm-hmm. So they have bogs, and they can have a local peat. There's a friend of mine, Boulder Spirits, Alistair, who's a Scotsman himself. He brings in peat from Scotland, and or peated grain from Scotland to do it. So it's different in each place, Mm-hmm. It really depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
So now when you say a third is mesquite smoked, is that of the distillate, or is that of the grain that's going into the still with other unpeated, unsmoked barley? At what stage does that blend occur?
Oh, good question.
Great question. It's actually done in the malting process, so right at the very beginning. And we happily share all our recipes with people. If they want to try and replicate it, you go at it. If you want to wait 5 years. So the malting is, I think everybody listening to this show knows about how malting works, but in the malting process, Breese Malting House out of Chilton, Wisconsin, smoke 100% of the grain that they sell us. So it comes in heavily smoked. Mm-hmm. And then we mix that with, and it's all about price point. Otherwise, we buy it all from one place. From BSG up in Shakopee, Minnesota. Shakopee? I hope I'm saying it right. Nobody's ever corrected me, so I'll just keep saying it that way. That's where 2/3 of the grain come from. And we mix those in it's actually a grain dumping hopper. We still use bags. We're small enough that we haven't even gone to super sacks. We still use 50-pound bags. We dump it in the hopper. they are mixed. So we'll do two bags of unsmoked, 1 bag of smoked. So it really starts at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, that's then in the mash tun, mashing away, then fermenting, then distilling. And it still amazes me that smoke that was there in the grain when it was in that green stage, growing in, from the field, malted in Chilton, Wisconsin, it stays with us all the way through that whole process of hot and cold.
Yeah, and for those people that have been listening, to recent episodes, Westland does it a lot differently.
Yeah.
They do different distillate and then blend that into what they call, I believe now, is their flagship.
Yeah, flagship.
Yes.
But their standard American single malt offering, which is, part smoke, but it's after the distillate has run through the still and then they blend it. Yeah. Very interesting.
So now that you've done everything with your grain, right? What type of still, what type are you doing to make, great whiskey from there? You've got it all grained down. You're going to cook and ferment. Like, what kind of still are you using?
So we're using a 1,000-liter Christian Carl still that was back when we bought it. We were told, this is the Rolls Royce. You've got to start with this one. We did. It's very good at making whiskeys and brandies. It's a pot still. We do have a column that's alongside it that we will use for doing our unsmoked whiskey. It's only a 5-plate, so we don't make our vodka there, etc. But that's just a standard pot still that we're running 330 odd gallons at a time.
Oh, nice.
Quite small. We use it as a stripping and a finishing still. Currently, we're actually in a fundraising round for anybody who wants to buy a distillery. No, I'm only kidding. No, for anybody who is who's in the distilling world will know. It's a lot of my job now is about fundraising for the next stage and the next stage. That next stage is a lot of marketing, but really to buy a stripping still 3 times the size, because we strip 3 times and then we finish 1 time. So out of we have a mash tun that's 1,000-gallon mash tun. I think that's 15 barrels, 30 barrel mash tun. So we end up with 1,000 gallons of mash to wort to 100 gallons. So it's a 2-barrel process that we do about once every week.
Oh wow!
So we're small, but we're going to triple that size very quickly.
Hey, if
you want to put your name on a still,
yeah. If you want a business opportunity,
yeah.
You can be a seed round investor in
there you go.
tranche 3 or tranche 4, maybe tranche 5, depending on
tranche 5. Yeah, there you go.
So let's talk a little bit about the whiskey we got in front of us. Let's talk about the classic first, right? Which was a 92 proof. Now it's an orange label. Let's just dive in, talk a little bit about this, because when we did the tasting with you all, which we were lucky enough to sit on a panel with a variety of other media folks, I was kind of scared, to be honest, because I was like, I didn't know what to think of mesquite smoked whiskey. And so, for the listeners, let's just walk through, Scott, I see you're pouring it. Let's walk through along with Colin, like the notes and some of those essences, because this is one that's readily available. You can buy it online. I'm on their website. I can get it shipped to you. So let's just walk through a little bit so people could see what they were to expect. So Scott, take it away.
I admit, anytime I hear smoke, I immediately jump to smoky Scotch, and that's just not me. So, when I initially nosed this and coming back to it tonight, I mean, it's really like I'm just sitting around like a campfire and somebody's roasting marshmallows, and yes, you get the smoke, but it's not like overwhelming. It's not like somebody lit the fire and now it's just, you're covered in black smoke and everything like that. So it's a light like perfumey smoke. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but it's like a really fragrant wood.
I would agree. No, I think you described it pretty well. It's a very light smoke that, and there's a lot of sweet notes that you even get on the nose.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Like sometimes with these more smoked whiskeys, I've been getting like some meaty notes, right? Like pork or barbecue. Like this is like you threw in some cherry wood, or you threw in something like that. I cut down a cedar tree, and those are the logs the earth cut down a cedar tree in my backyard and ruined my fence.
Yeah.
And so then
it forced you to have to cut it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Just fell over.
But that cedar is so fragrant, like Scott is saying, like it gives you a lot of flavors. And that's kind of, what I was thinking about when we were burning those logs the last time we had like guys over, Scott, was like how that cedar log was smelling.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like when you I don't know what they call them, but when you're at a cigar lounge and they give you the cedar stick and that's what you light your cigar with, you light that with the match. That is what it's almost like an incense. I like to burn incense every now and then, but
keep the voodoo away.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the nog champa, but yeah, it's like a real fragrant smoke, and that's what kind of this is. And you said sweeter notes, and I'm thinking like somebody like was roasting marshmallows.
Yeah,
because it does have that sugary, that burnt sugar note too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when I just without tasting it on the nose, those sweeter notes come through. And what really differentiates it, as there's a lot of people doing, well, not a lot, there's a few people doing mesquite whiskeys now. And when you say smoke in the whiskey category, people go to peat straight away. And that's a very different smoke to what this is. This is a burnt tree as opposed to burnt dirt, So that's why we're very cautious when we use the word smoke. In this, forum, it's fine because you guys know what you're looking at and you're willing to give it a try. You don't say, "Oh, I'm not going to try that," and shy away. But it definitely has as a lot of those woods do. You smell different things at different times.
Yeah.
First smell, you catch something. Second smell, you catch something. That's what we really like about our whiskey, is there's plenty of complex layers there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could even miss the smoke if you're more accustomed to it. Maybe you do like smoky, peaty scotches, and you're expecting that, and you're like, "This has got smoked." What?
Yes, well, I don't get it. Yeah.
Or if you have like a really oaky bourbon, like if you're like dealing with like a 15, 16-year-old like oaky bourbon, like I just drank the Remus Gatsby, right? Like that was really oaky, tannic.
Mm-hmm.
You get a lot of those characteristics, but it's not as tannic because it's not sitting in a barrel as long.
Yeah, no, I would agree. It, the way we age it is a minimum 3 year. So it does have plenty of oak on it. And I mentioned earlier, we'll talk a bit about why it's a little different to age where we do. At 7,000 feet, which is where we are in Santa Fe, it does two things. The air gets thinner as people who fly here from sea level and then try and hike up to the ski base and really find out quickly. You'll get lightheaded because the air is a lot thinner. What that also does is it means that there's very little humidity here. So the higher volatiles escape really quickly. And when we say, "Oh, we age only for 3 years," people look at us a little sideways and say, "Well, that's not very long." Kentucky, a lot of the bourbons that you guys know a lot better than I do. 6 years, quite easily 6 years, a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they say a minimum 2, but 4 to 6 is really the range most people are aiming for. And in Scotland, they really, and I agree with them, don't think it's become a real palatable whiskey until 10 years, usually. So it after 3 years, and a lot of people would agree with us, we can actually release a whiskey that has got a good flavor profile. You can't say it ages faster at this elevation, but it definitely, the lack of humidity means those barrels are going to give off a lot more quicker.
And you said new and used oak. So it's just a combination built into the blending process, what you're working out with.
And is it?
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No, after you, go ahead.
I was going to say, is it all ex-bourbon? If you're using used barrels, is it ex-bourbon barrels?
Yeah, we work with Kelvin Cooperage. And everybody knows Kelvin, great guys, really helped us out with all these supply and demand issues. Those guys have really struggled to help every one of their small customers like us. Just a little plug for one of our suppliers there. They sell us the used bourbon casks, which is whatever they've got. I mean, we've got Four Roses, we've got Buffalo Trace, we've got Heaven Hill, Jim Beam. A lot of different bourbons that they've aged in them, because that's what they have on hand. Also, they do make the new oak casks for us to a medium char. Everything we do is in 53s. We're big believers in going about it the classic way. We disagree politely with those who are trying to age faster in smaller casks and say it's the same thing. But that's a big discussion that I don't want to annoy people with. But we like to do it all in 53s.
Yeah. No, and Kelvin Cooper's is great. We had an amazing time seeing that location.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It's amazing.
I could watch him burn barrels all day. Like a moth to a flame. It's pretty cool. So for those who don't know, we're not going to go through the entire lineup, but they do have a cast strength version of the 92 of the classic that really kind of just exudes all the other flavors that they have. And then they have special edition casks like the apple brandy or the PX sherry. But we really want to just to kind of highlight the new innovation. And it's really not new. It's just a riff on what they're already doing, which is the unsmoked American single malt, which a lot of people have been clamoring for. They've tasted it maybe behind the scenes a little bit here and there, but this is just released, I believe. And talk to a little bit. Did you feel pressure to get this one out, or was it like, hey, it was time. Let's introduce this to the market?
A little bit of both, really. There was a certain amount of pressure in, well, what are you doing lately?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we're just making the same whiskey. And after 5 years, when I said we released the whiskey, it was great. And then what we do is we blend 15 casks at a time for the classic. And when we're picking the cask to go in, sometimes one is just a standout. That's why the cask strength came around. And then we thought, wow, other people are doing finishing. So we came out with the apple brandy cask finish because we already make an apple brandy and we had the casks on hand. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, that's great. That's great. Oh, it's good. And we realized that at least every couple of 3 years, we needed to do something a bit more inventive to sort of be in the conversation. So at it would have been about year 8, we said, let's lay down some unsmoked. So the big differentiator with the unsmoked is it doesn't start with a third mesquite smoke, a third unsmoked, a third, new oak, and a third used bourbon casks. This one is unsmoked. And we did put some in new oak and some in used oak because that was how we think about the recipe for regular Colkegan. But this is one that was different. And we tried it. It's about a 4-year coming up for. Actually, yeah. We finished it in December, put it into casks. What was that, 4 years ago? So it's very close to a 4-year. And same grain, BSG from Shakopee up there in Minnesota. And none of the Breeze malting house smoke grain. And we just put it away and, to be honest, forgot about it. That's why it's a 4-year, more than a 3-year.
Well,
and COVID actually does give you a chance, because we like everybody turned to hand sanitizer. So we weren't really thinking about how do we get back to the market. But we did a reevaluation of everything we're doing. Oh, my goodness. That's right. We got some unsmoked laid down.
Yeah. And then, you just find another color label and you're Bob's your uncle, right?
Yeah. And we changed the label on this because all the other labels are on a black bottle, a black label with lots, the same text. And we differentiate them with a band across the bottom that's green, blue, orange, or red, and the government seal across the top that's different. This one's completely different, and we've gone for the lighter yellow label, because we wanted to really differentiate it as quite different from the rest of the pack.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is if you can take your mind and imagine not having the mesquite smoke in there, it just all of that kind of pushes through in the unsmoked, right? So it's more fruit forward. So you lose a little bit of that, campfire, being outside, cedar type notes, and you just get like this full orchard fruit flavored whiskey, right? It's really balanced, kind of tip of the tongue a little bit, I would say, maybe forward just from a sweet note. But it vanillas and at the very end linger around, just super balanced. And like what's really cool is, I think, not to be your marketing person, maybe I'm interested in buying a share of Colkegan, I don't know, is seeing this in a sherry and seeing this in an apple brandy, like moving forward, this one is really, really, really super solid, and complements the classic very nicely.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that was really the goal, was to sort of definitely be in the pack with the other stuff. I mean, it's the same grain, made at the same elevation, aged in the same way. But I think you're exactly right. The fruity notes come through a lot stronger. The vanilla, I think there's a bit of nutmeg in the background there. And even for me, there's a lot more sort of baking apple tart kind of flavors, there's sort of graininess and the bakery kind of smells that come out of grains, etc.
Well, it's perfect for the season that we're in, right? So everyone's getting their pies ready, and about ready to pack on 10 to 20 pounds. Thank you, Thanksgiving or Indigenous People Day, and every other holiday that you could possibly celebrate between now and New Year's. But, I'm excited to Scott. I failed Scott for this podcast, so excited to get him this bottle, so he can give it a whirl. But, I think this portfolio is unique because we've talked to Boulder, we've talked to Westland, we've talked to Westward. Good Lord, they all start with W's, it feels like, too. So it's Wonderback, like all these other places. And I just love that this one is uniquely different. Like you all are doing something uniquely different. And then you're adding back that unsmoked element to say, hey, we can play in this game too, but this is who we are. We're homage to New Mexico. I just think that's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very proud of who and what we are and how we come about what we do.
Yeah.
As are all those guys that you mentioned. I mean, we all play very nice together.
Yeah.
We all find it as much, and I'm going to use this is my excuse now to promote all those other guys making the same whiskey. Don't always just buy mine, buy one of everybody's. We all say the same thing. We like to work that way.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I think, just keep a lookout on what American Single Malt's doing, because it's an expanding category. Thanks to Scott, we were early adopters to it here on the Bourbon Lens. And I think it's changed mine and Scott's tasting profile for the better. I don't know, Scott, I'm maybe speaking for you, but I think that to be true.
Yeah, this corn whiskey guy quickly fell in love with the American Single Malt because it was just so unique, but it was still uniquely American too.
Right. Yeah,
because everybody's doing it their own way, and I think that's the great part.
It does fascinate me when we always worry about the 5 different regions of Scotland. You can drive to 5 of them in a day. Well, not quite, because it's hilly over there. We have such a topography and terroir that, I mean, we actually start talking a terroir in different regions. We more import ours because our grain's coming from the Midwest. But our aging process definitely adds to that. You take Westland and the Westward guys, they're definitely from the Northwest, They really are doing something different.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys have managed to try 888 Randy there out in Nantucket. You can taste the salt in his whiskey. He doesn't smoke it, but you know how the Islay whiskeys have that sort of saltiness to them? He gets it in his whiskey out in Nantucket. And in Virginia, there's a softness and a smoothness. It's a bit like the Virginia hills, and it's damp and it's moist over there. Virginia Distilling do a great job too.
Yeah.
So we're all definitely it's a big country, and there's a big difference from one to the other, one end to the other.
Yeah. Well, and what's cool is what you all have done in the last 10 years has made these giant conglomerates take notice, because you see Jack Daniels, you see Jim Beam, you see a variety of these other large bourbon houses say, you know what? American single malt is a thing. Let's produce our own. And I think that's really cool that you all have made an impact, not just on America in crafting your own spirit and getting this formalized by the TTB, but you've taken these bourbon giants and said, hey, take notice. And they've started to craft their own.
They really have. I mean, people are doing so. And a lot of these craft distilleries, similar to us, have been snapped up. It's a great, easy way for the big conglomerates to be as creative as we are. We can be nimble. They have to run through a board and executive and all that stuff. So it's more difficult. I mean, a lot of my friends have been, Westwood is one that's, now a Remy Cointreau product.
Yeah.
West Ward has, Diageo 10% of it.
Yeah.
About this week or in this last 2 weeks is now, my brain's gone. Who owns them now? They just got bought by a big house.
Diageo. Yeah. Diageo.
Diageo. So we really have created a category that is getting some attention.
Yeah.
Us next. And I think the good thing about, and I hope for my buddies in this industry, hopefully they've done well out of it. You never know with these deals, but they hopefully can maintain the integrity of what they put together. And I'm an idealist, and I would love to believe that. I know things change when big corporations get involved, but I know all those guys, and they would definitely all be pushing for keeping the integrity of what they created.
For sure. No, for sure. And it's super exciting and excited to see how you all continue to innovate the category along with the rest of the American Single Malt Commission.
Oh, cheers. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're looking forward to more.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Colin, thanks for joining this episode of Bourbon Lens. We're super glad that you're here, and we would be remiss if we didn't give you the opportunity to market a little bit. So tell people where they can find out more about, your all's whiskey and connect with you all, maybe on social media.
Yeah, SantaFeSpirits.com. There's a buy now button if you're in a different state that we're actually not distributed in. We are in quite a few different states, although sort of in the high-end liquor stores in Illinois, New York, Florida, California, Montana, Idaho. I've got to get it right now. Wyoming, Oregon. But if it's piqued your interest, you can buy us online. Just go to our website, and our retailers can get it out to you. But of course, if you're ever in Santa Fe, you're welcome to come to the tasting rooms. Tell me you listen to this bourbon podcast, and you get a free tour. You probably got to listen to me rabbit on about more whiskey, but that's okay.
Hey, I may be on a flight to Santa Fe.
Good. Come join us. It's a great place for Thanksgiving, I can promise you.
Me and my wife were talking about what do we want to do after the holidays to get away. So we looked like the north, but we haven't looked to the southwest. So
yeah,
need to look at flights to Santa Fe or Albuquerque. And
love to see you out here. We love sharing what we do. We're actually quite proud of where we live.
Oh, sweet.
It's funny, a guy from England saying, I'm proud of where I live. It's the middle of the desert. But we really are. And I've been here now 30 years. So more of my years here than anywhere else. Happy to be here.
Yeah. No. Well, make sure if you're out west, go to Santa Fe. It's gorgeous. And Hatch Green chilies grow there. I mean, who doesn't want
Hatch Green chili? Yeah. It's great. Don't listen to the guys from Colorado. Ours is best.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why Chewy's has Hatch Green Chili Fest from New Mexico, right?
Yeah.
That's big fan.
Big fan.
But thanks everyone for listening to this episode. Thanks, Colin, for joining us. As always, you can find out more about Bourbon Lens at bourbonlens.com, as well as our social medias, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Bourbon Lens. You can always find us on your favorite podcast listening app. Make sure you rate us, give us a 5-star review. And last, we're so thankful for our Patreon group. It's growing. The tasting club is phenomenal. I'm going to have to say, Scott, Santa Fe Spirits is a great person to line up for one of our tasting clubs in 2023. Come join that group where we hang out, we drink whiskeys, we hear from people that make whiskeys like Colin, and we have a good time. So if you're interested, go over to patreon.com/bourbonlens and sign up for $7 a month. And you can try a variety of different whiskeys from all across the country and the world. So until next time, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.